Fox News aired their interview with Vice President Kamala Harris. As y'all know, I said it point blank, they're the communications arm of the Republican National Committee. And so things got a little contentious between the VP and Bret Baier. Here is some of that conversation.
So, looking back, do you regret the decision to terminate Remain in Mexico at the beginning of your administration?
At the beginning of our administration, within practically hours of taking the oath, the first bill that we offered Congress, before we worked on infrastructure, before the Inflation Reduction Act, before the CHIPS and Science Act, before the bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the first bill, practically within hours of taking the oath, was a bill to fix our immigration system.
Yes, ma'am. It was called the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021.
Exactly.
It was essentially a pathway to citizenship for the...
Yes, ma'am. May I finish responding, please? But you have to let me finish,
You
please.
had the White House and the House and the Senate, and they didn't bring up that bill.
I'm in the middle of responding to the point you're raising, and I'd like to finish.
Yes, ma'am.
We recognized from day one that, to the point of this being your first question, it is a priority for us as a nation and for the American people. And our focus has been on fixing a problem. And from day one, then, we have done a number of things, including to address our asylum system and put more resources, getting more judges, what we needed to do to tighten up penalties and increase penalties for illegal crossings, what we needed to do to deal with points of entry between border entry points. That's the work we did, and we worked on supporting what was a bipartisan effort, including some of the most conservative members of the United States Congress, to actually strengthen the border. That border bill would have put 1,500 more border agents at the border, which is why I believe the Border Patrol agents supported the bill. It would have allowed us to stem the flow of fentanyl coming into the United States, which is a scourge affecting people of every background, every geographic location in our country, killing people. It would have allowed us to put more resources into prosecuting transnational criminal organizations, which I have done as the Attorney General, former Attorney General of a border state.
Madam Vice President, a couple of things.
Prosecuted trafficking of drugs, guns, and human beings. And Donald Trump, but let me just finish.
Six Democrats voted against that bill.
Learned about that bill and told them to kill it because he preferred to run on a problem instead of fixing a problem. And in this election, this is rightly a discussion that the American people want to have. And what they want are solutions, and they want a president of the United States who's not playing political games with the issue.
I hear you.
But actually is focused on the issue.
Right. I hear you.
But actually is focused.
Now, of course, Trump made this comment about enemies within. Baier brought that up. Let's just say the VP didn't mince any words when he did.
Asked that question to the former president today. Harris Faulkner had a town hall, and this is how he responded.
I heard about that. They were saying I was like threatening. I'm not threatening anybody. They're the ones doing the threatening. They do phony investigations. I've been investigated more than Alphonse Capone. He was the greatest gangster. No, it's true. No, but think of it. It's called weaponization of government. It's a terrible thing.
So,
Bret, I'm sorry, and with all due respect, that clip was not what he has been saying about the enemy within that he has repeated when he's speaking about the American people. That's not what you just showed.
Well, he was asked about that specific...
No, that's not what you just showed. In all fairness and respect to you,
that was the question that we asked him.
He didn't show that, and here's the bottom line. He has repeated it many times, and you and I both know that. And you and I both know that he has talked about turning the American military on the American people. He has talked about going after people who are engaged in peaceful protest. He has talked about locking people up because they disagree with him. This is a democracy. And in a democracy, the President of the United States, in the United States of America, should be willing to be able to handle criticism without saying he'd lock people up for doing it. And this is what is at stake, which is why you have someone like the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff saying what Mark Milley has said about Donald Trump being a threat to the United States of America.
Well, they didn't like that answer. Let's bring in our panel. Dr. Nola Haynes, of course, Georgetown University School of Foreign Service. Dr. Greg Carr, Department of Afro-American Studies at Howard University. Also, Lauren Victoria Burke, Black Press USA. Nola, I'll start with you. That interview got 8.1 million viewers on Fox, combined with the replay, some 9.5 million, the largest that show has gotten since 2020. And a little feisty there. And of course, you hear all these people sitting here talking about, well, how she went on there. But you will never see Donald Trump go on MSNBC and take any questions, will you?
No, never at all. No, never at all. And feistiness is very different from being combative, from being insulting. And, you know, the vice president, she did what she had to do, because if she didn't, that would have been that entire interview would have been a gotcha interview. It would not have been facts-based, just like the clip that he showed that had nothing to do with his comments about imprisoning Americans simply because they disagree with him. And for her to stand there, look that man dead in his face, like with the stare, it's like, what you're not about to do is play in my face. And so she definitely showed all of those people who were watching it, what many of us already knew, that she is no joke. She is not one to be played with, and she can follow it up with substance. And that's what that Fox interview was about. And that's what a lot of Americans saw.
Lauren, again, it was a 26-minute interview, and Baier, of course, everybody lauded him, saying, oh, he's a journalist. But let's be real clear. The Fox News is the communications arm of the Republican Party. And, of course, they paid a $787.5 million settlement advancing Donald Trump's lies, still involved in the Smartmatic lawsuit. I wouldn't have given Fox News any time of day.
Yeah, well, I mean, we are at a point with journalism where journalism and politics has intersected, and some of these so-called journalistic platforms are really political arms masquerading as journalistic platforms. And because the First Amendment really allows journalists really to do almost anything in terms of editorial content, you know, Fox News has never checked on what they do. So what we had there was Bret Baier with his narrative agenda that by some coincidence matches exactly what the Republican Party and Donald Trump has been saying about immigration and everything else, with all these facts, not in evidence narratives about people who've been murdered by people who have immigrated to this country, and then blaming whoever's in office at the time for that, if that person is a Democrat. Then Bret Baier, of course, talking over the vice president when she's trying to make her points during the interview. So what we really had was Bret Baier interviewing himself, putting the typical Republican narrative in place during the interview, and of course, talking over the vice president when she's trying to answer a question. You know, understanding the fact that, of course, the vice president is trying to run out the clock, which all politicians do during these things. You're trying to run out the clock as much as you can during an interview, particularly if it's 30 minutes. But still, even with that, that was an unusual number, an unusual amount of interruption by Bret Baier, particularly when a point is being made that Fox News audience is not used to hearing. They do it all the time. They do it around the clock. And it is a really good example of how journalism has become extremely, extremely political.
Greg Carr, first of all, when you look at how folks view this, of course, you had folks on the right saying, oh, my God, she's awful. She didn't answer any questions. Her supporters said how she actually crushed it. Your assessment of what we saw with this interview?
Well, Roland, we know that there's nothing to lose. She has nothing to lose by going to Fox. I think, I'm not a biblical scholar. Is it Gideon that talked about going into the enemy's tent and turning over the tables? So anyone who watches Fox, the biggest legacy media news station there is around, is probably not going to change their mind. Maybe some people, maybe some will, maybe some won't. But the key there is, she's in full spectrum, kind of everywhere at once mode now. I mean, she sat with you finally. And, like Lauren said, these things have blended so much that she's in the Shade Room. She's in the Breakfast Club. She's with Howard Stern. Call Me Daddy. She's everywhere. You can't beat Trump in terms of the wall-to-wall exposure, because he's dropped all pretenses. And when you commingle that with his diminished mental capacity, whether he's swaying to the tunes of everything from Dixie to whatever else they can throw on to opera, standing next to the dog killer Christy Nome, or whether he's just blurting out his absurdities, he's going to get coverage everywhere. But what she seems to have done now is basically say, I'm here. What you going to do? It does communicate strength. Now, as you opened the early voting in Georgia, over the 300,000 mark, 2 days in a row, over nearly 700,000 early votes already cast in Pennsylvania, sitting there in North Carolina. And I always shout out to Rocky Mount, the home of Buck Leonard and Thelonious Monk and all those heroes down there. We know that now the key is to treat every day between now and November 5th as election day. Take November the 5th out of play, if we can, by early voting. So I think that interview where she punched Bret Baier in the face, and even Brit Hume had to admit, well, she scored some points. Yeah, Bret Baier last night played the stand-in for Donald Trump. And slapping him around is the closest she'll get to slapping around a coward who is ducking her. And so I think what she's doing now, even as she comes here this weekend for Howard's Homecoming on her HBCU tour before she decamps later in the day, I think Saturday is the day the kids are saying she'll be here to go to more battleground states. She is now, looks like she's treating every day between now and November the 5th as a get out the vote opportunity and going as full spectrum as she can in mass media. And hell, that seems to me to be a pretty good strategy.
In 2016, Donald Trump said he would choose only the best people to work in his White House. Now those people have a warning for America. Trump is not fit to be president again. Here's his vice president.
Anyone who puts himself over the Constitution should never be president of the United States.
It should come as no surprise that I will not be endorsing Donald Trump this year.
His defense secretary.
Do you think Trump can be trusted with the nation's secrets ever again?
No. I mean, it's just irresponsible action that places our service members at risk, places our nation's security at risk.
His national security advisor.
Donald Trump will cause a lot of damage. The only thing he cares about is Donald Trump.
And the nation's highest-ranking military officer.
We don't take an oath to a king or a queen or to a tyrant or a dictator. And we don't take an oath to a wannabe dictator.
Take it from the people who knew him best. Donald Trump is a danger to our troops and our democracy. We can't let him lead our country again.
I'm Kamala Harris, and I approve this message.